When a stranger slipped into David's room wearing nothing but an oversized shirt, she brought with her a secret that would change everything he thought he knew about his grandmother's house. David never thought he would be living alone in his grandmother's old house. The place felt huge and empty without her warm laugh filling the rooms. 3 months had passed since he moved in, and he was still getting used to all the strange sounds the old house made at night. Every evening, the wooden floors would creak as the house settled down for sleep. The pipes would make soft gurgling sounds, and sometimes the wind would whistle through the old windows. At first, these sounds kept him awake, but now they had become like old friends keeping him company. His life had completely changed over the past year. The divorce papers were finally signed, and starting fresh felt both scary and exciting. This old Victorian house in the countryside was his grandmother's gift to him, a place to heal and figure out what came next. She always said the house had healing powers, though he never really understood what she meant by that. The house was beautiful but needed work. Paint was peeling from some walls, and a few floorboards squeaked louder than others. David had been slowly fixing things, finding comfort in working with his hands. It kept his mind busy and helped him sleep better at night. On this particular Tuesday evening in October, the air was crisp and autumn leaves were dancing outside his bedroom window. David had made himself a cup of tea and settled into his favorite reading chair by the window. The book in his hands was one his grandmother had recommended years ago, something about finding peace in simple moments. The house was especially quiet tonight. No wind, no creaking pipes, just perfect silence. David liked these peaceful evenings when he could read without any distractions. The warm glow from his bedside lamp made everything feel cozy and safe. He was deep into his book when something made him look up. There, standing in his bedroom doorway, was a woman he had never seen before. His heart jumped into his throat, and the book fell from his hands onto the floor with a soft thud. She appeared to be around 30 years old, with beautiful reddish-brown hair that fell just past her shoulders. She was wearing what looked like an old oversized dress shirt that reached down to her thighs. Her feet were completely bare, and she moved without making even the slightest sound on the wooden floor. What struck David most was how calm she seemed. She wasn't acting like someone who had just broken into his house. Instead, she moved with quiet confidence, as if she had every right to be there. Her eyes were gentle but alert, taking in everything about the room and about him. Without saying a word, she walked slowly across the room and sat down on the edge of his bed. The mattress barely moved under her weight. She folded her hands in her lap and looked directly at him with eyes that seemed to hold many secrets. David's mouth went dry. His mind was racing with 1,000 questions, but no words would come out. Who was this woman? How did she get into his locked house? Why wasn't she afraid? And most confusing of all, why did her presence feel somehow familiar? "You're not who I expected," she said finally. Her voice was soft and pleasant, with just a hint of an accent that David couldn't quite place. It sounded maybe European, but he wasn't sure from where. She spoke these words like they were having a normal conversation, as if appearing in a stranger's bedroom at night was the most natural thing in the world. Her tone was neither threatening nor afraid, just matter-of-fact, like she was commenting on the weather. David tried to speak, but only managed to make a small, choking sound. His mind was completely blank. In all his 35 years, nothing like this had ever happened to him. He had always lived a very ordinary, predictable life. Strange women didn't just appear in his bedroom. The woman tilted her head slightly, studying his face with curious eyes. "I know this must be confusing," she continued in that same calm voice. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I was expecting someone else to be living here." She looked around the room, taking in his few personal belongings, some family photos on the dresser, his clothes folded neatly on a chair, the book that had fallen to the floor. Her gaze lingered on a photo of his grandmother that sat on the nightstand. "She was a wonderful woman," the stranger said, nodding toward the photo. "She helped me when no one else would." David's confusion deepened. This woman knew his grandmother? But how was that possible? His grandmother had lived alone for the last 10 years of her life, rarely having visitors except for family. She had never mentioned knowing any young women. The woman seemed to read the questions in his eyes. "My name is Elena," she said simply, "and I have been living in this house for quite some time." David finally found his voice. "Living here? But that's impossible. I've been here for 3 months. I would have seen you." Elena smiled, and for the first time since she appeared, her serious expression softened. "You would think so, wouldn't you? But this old house has many secrets. Your grandmother knew them all." She stood up from the bed and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit yard. "I know this is hard to believe, but I have been here watching over this place. Watching over you too, in a way." David felt like he was dreaming. Nothing about this situation made sense. But somehow, despite his confusion and shock, he wasn't afraid of Elena. There was something about her that felt safe, even protective. "I don't understand any of this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena turned back to face him. "I know, and I promise I will explain everything. But first, I need you to know that I never meant any harm. I have been very careful not to disturb your life here." She walked back toward the bed but didn't sit down this time. Instead, she stood there, looking at him with eyes that seemed both sad and hopeful. "Your grandmother told me that someday someone would come to this house who would need it as much as I do, someone who would understand what it means to start over completely." David stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. His grandmother had been gone for almost a year now, passing away peacefully in her sleep. How could she have known about Elena? And how could she have predicted that David would end up living here? "I think," Elena said softly, "that person is you." David sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Elena remained standing by his bed, patient and calm, as if she had all the time in the world to wait for his response. The moonlight coming through the window cast soft shadows across her face, making her seem almost like a ghost. "I know you have questions," Elena said gently. "Would you like me to show you where I've been staying?" David nodded slowly, not trusting his voice yet. Elena walked toward the bedroom door and he followed on shaky legs. She moved through his house like she knew every inch of it, which apparently she did. They walked down the hallway, past the bathroom and into the kitchen. The kitchen looked exactly as David had left it after dinner. Clean dishes in the rack, everything in its proper place. But Elena went straight to the old wooden pantry in the corner. She pressed against what looked like a solid back wall, and to David's amazement it swung inward like a hidden door. "Your grandmother showed me this when I first arrived," Elena explained, stepping through the opening. She said the original owners built it during difficult times when people sometimes needed places to hide. David followed her through the secret doorway and found himself in a small room he never knew existed. It was bigger than a closet, but smaller than a regular bedroom. A narrow window near the ceiling let in just enough moonlight to see by. The space was surprisingly cozy. A simple cot sat against one wall with neatly folded blankets. A small table held a few books, a water glass, and what looked like a journal. Clothes hung from hooks on the wall, and everything was incredibly clean and organized. "I've been living here for about 4 months," Elena said, sitting down on the edge of the cot. "Your grandmother found me at the bus station in town. I had nowhere else to go." David looked around the tiny room, trying to understand how someone could live in such a small space for so long. "But how did you eat? How did you manage without me knowing?" Elena smiled sadly. "Your grandmother taught me your schedule before she passed away. She knew you would come to live here eventually. I learned when you went to town for groceries, when you worked in the yard, when you took your evening walks. I was very careful to only take what I needed when you weren't around." She opened a small cabinet David hadn't noticed before. Inside were canned goods, crackers, and other non-perishable foods. "I always replaced what I took. When you bought groceries, I would slip a few extra dollars into your wallet to cover what I had used." David remembered finding unexpected money in his wallet several times and thinking he had miscounted his cash. Now it all made sense. "I also helped when I could," Elena continued. "You probably noticed that some small repairs around the house seemed to fix themselves. A loose floorboard would suddenly stop squeaking or a dripping faucet would stop dripping. David's eyes widened. He had noticed these things and had convinced himself that old houses sometimes settled in helpful ways. That was you? I grew up learning to fix things. My father was a handyman and he taught me well. It felt good to help take care of this house that was protecting me. Elena stood up and moved to the small window. I watched you sometimes, David. I hope you don't mind me saying so, but you looked as lost as I felt. Your grandmother told me you were going through difficult times too. David leaned against the doorframe, still processing everything. She talked about me. Often. She was very worried about you. She said your marriage had ended badly, and you were struggling to find your way again. She hoped that living in this house would help you heal, just like it was helping me. They talked through most of the night. Elena told him about her journey to America, how she had saved money for years to come here looking for a better life. She had trusted someone who promised to help her but instead had tried to control and hurt her. When she finally escaped, she had nothing left, except the clothes she was wearing. I was sleeping in the park when your grandmother found me, Elena said. She didn't ask many questions. She just said I looked like someone who needed help and she knew a safe place where I could stay. Elena explained how David's grandmother had visited her every day, bringing food and supplies, teaching her about the house and its history. She told me this wasn't the first time someone had used this room to start over. She said the house had a way of bringing together people who needed each other. As the sun began to rise, David realized his whole world had changed overnight. He wasn't alone in this big house anymore. He had been sharing it all along with someone who in many ways was going through the same struggle he was. What happens now? He asked as they sat in his kitchen, watching the sunrise through the window. Elena looked uncertain for the first time since she had appeared. I don't know. I understand if you want me to leave. I never intended for you to find out about me. David considered this. By all logic, he should be calling the police, or at least asking her to leave immediately. But something his grandmother used to say kept echoing in his mind. The heart knows things the head hasn't figured out yet. Stay, he heard himself saying. At least for now. Let's figure this out together. The next few weeks brought changes neither David nor Elena had expected. What started as an awkward arrangement slowly transformed into something that felt surprisingly natural. David had always lived alone, even during his marriage, but sharing the house with Elena felt different from anything he had experienced before. Elena no longer hid in the secret room. David had insisted she use the guest bedroom upstairs, which had more space and better light. She was hesitant at first, afraid of imposing, but David convinced her that the house was big enough for both of them. Their daily routines began to overlap in comfortable ways. Elena was an early riser and would often have coffee ready when David came downstairs. She was an excellent cook and introduced him to foods from her homeland that he had never tried before. In return, David shared his grandmother's recipes that he was still learning to make. Elena's presence brought a warmth to the house that David hadn't realized was missing. She had a talent for making spaces feel welcoming. She arranged flowers from the garden in old mason jars, opened curtains to let in more sunlight, and somehow made everything feel more alive. But it was their conversations that surprised David the most. Elena was thoughtful and well-read, despite having had limited formal education. She had taught herself English by reading library books and had a curious mind that asked interesting questions about everything. They would talk for hours about books, about dreams, about the strange paths that had led them both to this old house. Elena never pressed David for details about his past, but gradually he found himself sharing things he had never told anyone else. My marriage ended because I lost myself in it, he admitted one evening as they sat on the front porch. I tried so hard to be what she wanted that I forgot who I actually was. Elena nodded understandingly. I know that feeling. When someone controls you for long enough, you forget your own voice. David was teaching Elena to drive using his grandmother's old pickup truck. She had never learned before, having grown up in a city where cars weren't necessary. Their practice sessions on the quiet country roads were filled with laughter and gentle encouragement. Elena was a careful student, gripping the steering wheel with determination while David patiently explained everything. She was afraid of making mistakes, but David helped her understand that mistakes were just part of learning. "You're doing great," he would tell her when she got frustrated. "Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about getting comfortable with the process." These driving lessons became one of their favorite activities. Elena would pack sandwiches, and they would drive to different parts of the countryside, exploring areas David had never visited despite living there for months. Elena had a gift for noticing beautiful details that David often missed. She would point out unusual cloud formations, interesting old barns, or wildflowers growing by the roadside. Through her eyes, David began to see the area where he lived as more than just a place to hide from his problems. But their peaceful routine was disrupted when outside pressures began to intrude. David's ex-wife started calling more frequently, asking pointed questions about why he seemed so content living alone. She had expected him to be miserable without her and was suspicious about his improved mood. "You sound different, David," she would say during their phone calls. "Are you seeing someone?" David would assure her that he was simply finding peace in the quiet country life, but her questions made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to lie, but he also wasn't ready to explain Elena's presence to anyone yet. Elena faced her own challenges when she started receiving disturbing messages on an old phone she had kept hidden. Someone from her past had apparently tracked down her general location and was trying to contact her. David noticed Elena becoming more anxious, checking the locks on doors and windows repeatedly. She would startle at unexpected sounds and seemed constantly alert for potential threats. "Is there something I should know about?" David asked gently when he found her standing at the kitchen window at 3 a.m, watching the driveway. Elena hesitated before answering. "There's someone who might be looking for me. Someone I hoped would never find me." David felt a protective instinct he hadn't expected. "Do you want to tell me about it?" Elena turned from the window and looked at him with tired eyes. "His name is Vincent, and he's the reason I had to leave everything behind. He doesn't like it when people leave him." She explained that Vincent had controlled every aspect of her life for 2 years, isolating her from friends and family, monitoring her activities, and becoming increasingly possessive and threatening. When she finally found the courage to escape, she had to leave in the middle of the night with nothing. "I thought I was safe here," Elena said, "but these messages suggest he's getting closer." David felt anger rising in his chest at the thought of someone terrorizing Elena. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "You don't have to face this alone." As they stood together in the kitchen, both looking out at the dark yard, David realized how much Elena had come to mean to him. She wasn't just someone staying in his house anymore. She had become his friend, his companion, and someone he genuinely cared about protecting. The peaceful sanctuary they had created together was about to be tested, but David was determined not to let anyone destroy the healing they had both found in this old house that seemed to specialize in bringing together people who needed each other. 2 weeks after Elena told David about Vincent, their worst fears came true. David was fixing a loose board on the front porch when a black car pulled into their driveway. A tall man with dark hair got out and walked toward the house with determined steps. David had never seen Vincent before, but he knew immediately who this was. The man had an aggressive way of moving, like he owned everything around him. His expensive clothes and shiny watch didn't hide the meanness in his eyes. "Where is she?" Vincent demanded without even introducing himself. "I know Elena is here." David stood up slowly, still holding his hammer. His heart was pounding, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "I think you have the wrong house." Vincent laughed coldly. "Don't lie to me. I've been tracking her phone signals to this area for weeks. She's here and she's coming home with me today." Elena must have heard the voices because she appeared in the doorway behind David. When she saw Vincent, all the color drained from her face. She looked like she might collapse. "Hello, Elena," Vincent said with a fake smile. "I've been looking everywhere for you. You've caused me a lot of trouble." "I don't want to go with you," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please just leave me alone." Vincent's smile disappeared. "You don't get to make that choice. You belong to me, and you're coming home. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." David stepped protectively in front of Elena. He had never been in a physical fight in his adult life, but something inside him had awakened. "She said she doesn't want to go. That means you need to leave." Vincent looked David up and down dismissively. "This is between me and my girlfriend. Stay out of it, old man." "I'm not your girlfriend," Elena said, finding her courage. "I was never your girlfriend. You just convinced me I had no other choice." Vincent's face grew red with anger. "You had everything with me. A nice apartment, nice clothes, everything you could want. And you threw it all away to live like this? In some old house with some stranger?" Elena stepped out from behind David. "I threw away a prison. This house, this life, this is freedom, this is what happiness feels like." Vincent pulled out his phone and showed them something on the screen. "See this? I've been recording every word. Elena stole from me when she left. Money, jewelry, important papers. The police will be very interested in hearing about this." David felt Elena tense up beside him. He could tell that whatever Vincent was claiming, there might be some truth to it, even if the situation was more complicated than Vincent was making it sound. "I took evidence," Elena said quietly. "Pictures of what you did to me. Records of your business deals that aren't exactly legal. I kept them safe in case you tried to force me back." Vincent's confident expression faltered for just a moment. "You're bluffing, you wouldn't dare." Elena straightened her shoulders. "Try me." The confrontation continued for another hour, with Vincent alternating between threats and promises. He claimed he had changed, that he missed her, that things would be different if she came back. But Elena had heard these words before, and knew they meant nothing. David watched Elena transform before his eyes. The quiet, careful woman he had come to know was revealing a strength he hadn't seen before. She stood up to Vincent's bullying with a calmness that impressed and worried David at the same time. Finally, Vincent realized that Elena wasn't going to be intimidated into leaving with him. His mask of fake charm completely dropped, and his true nature showed through. "Fine," he snarled. "But this isn't over. I know where you live now. I know who you're with. You can't hide forever." After Vincent left, David immediately called the local police. Elena was hesitant at first, afraid that involving authorities might make things worse. But David convinced her that documenting Vincent's threats was important for her safety. Officer Johnson, a kind woman in her 40s, listened patiently as Elena explained her situation. She photographed the threatening text messages Vincent had been sending and took detailed notes about his visit. "Do you have evidence of his other illegal activities?" Officer Johnson asked. Elena nodded and went to retrieve a small envelope she had hidden in the secret room. Inside were photographs, documents, and copies of financial records that painted a clear picture of Vincent's criminal business dealings. "This is very helpful," Officer Johnson said. "But I have to warn you that pressing charges means testifying in court. Are you prepared for that?" Elena looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready to tell the truth." Over the next several weeks, as the legal process moved forward, David learned more about his grandmother's past. While cleaning out the attic, they found boxes of old letters and documents that revealed the house's history as a refuge for people in trouble. During World War II, David's great-grandmother had hidden families fleeing persecution. In the 1960s, his grandmother had helped women escaping domestic violence. The secret room had been used many times over the decades to shelter people who needed a safe place to rebuild their lives. "Your family has been doing this for generations," Elena said as they read through the old letters. "Your grandmother didn't just help me by accident. It's who your family is." David felt a deep connection to this legacy he had never known about. Understanding his family's history of helping others gave new meaning to his decision to let Elena stay and to stand up to Vincent. The legal case against Vincent progressed faster than expected. Elena's evidence, combined with testimony from other women who came forward, painted a clear picture of his pattern of control and manipulation. Vincent was arrested on multiple charges including harassment, fraud, and money laundering. David stood by Elena throughout every court appearance, holding her hand during difficult testimony and celebrating small victories together. He watched her grow stronger and more confident with each passing day. During one particularly difficult court session, Elena broke down while describing her life with Vincent. The prosecutor called a recess, and David found her crying in the hallway. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "It's too hard." David sat beside her and took her hands. "Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know, and you're not doing this alone." Elena looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "How did I get so lucky to find someone like you?" David smiled gently. "I think my grandmother had something to do with it." 6 months later, the legal case was finally over. Vincent was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and Elena was officially free from the fear that had haunted her for so long. The judge commended her bravery in coming forward and noted that her testimony had likely prevented other women from suffering the same treatment. Spring had arrived at the old house, and David and Elena had spent weeks working together in the garden his grandmother had once tended. Elena had a natural talent for growing things, and under her care, flowers and vegetables flourished in ways David had never managed on his own. They had settled into a comfortable routine that felt as natural as breathing. Elena had started a small business making traditional crafts that she sold at the local farmers market every Saturday. Her beautiful hand-woven scarves and painted pottery were becoming popular with both locals and tourists. David had returned to teaching, something he had given up during his troubled marriage. He now taught adult education classes at the community center, helping people earn their high school equivalency diplomas. Many of his students reminded him of Elena, people who had faced difficult circumstances but were determined to build better lives. Their relationship had evolved into something beautiful and unique. It wasn't the passionate romance of movies, but something deeper and more lasting. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other's dreams and helping each other heal from past wounds. Elena had legally established residency in the house, with David's enthusiastic support. They had renovated the secret room into Elena's art studio, where she worked on her crafts surrounded by good lighting and all her supplies organized perfectly. The house itself had been transformed. What was once David's lonely refuge had become a warm, welcoming home filled with laughter and life. They often hosted dinner parties for their friends from town, and Elena's cooking had become legendary in their small community. David's family had gradually accepted Elena, won over by her kindness and the positive changes they saw in him. His sister visited regularly and had become one of Elena's closest friends. Even David's ex-wife had eventually acknowledged that David seemed happier than she had ever seen him. One evening in late spring, as they worked side by side in the EO garden, Elena asked a question that had been on her mind for months. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had called the police that first night when you found me in your room?" David paused in his weeding and considered this seriously. "I think about it sometimes, but you know what I believe? I think my grandmother knew exactly what she was doing when she told you someone would come who would understand." Elena smiled and reached over to squeeze his hand. She was a wise woman. "She used to say that the house had healing powers," David continued. "I never understood what she meant until now. It's not the house itself that heals people. It's what happens when the right people find each other at the right time." They continued working as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The garden was thriving. The house was full of warmth and love, and both of them had found something they hadn't even known they were looking for. Elena had discovered that home wasn't a place you were born into, but a place where you were accepted completely for who you were. David had learned that healing didn't mean forgetting the past, but learning to build something beautiful from the pieces that remained. As they gathered their gardening tools and headed inside for dinner, Elena looked back at the house that had sheltered her when she had nowhere else to go. "Thank you," she whispered to David's grandmother, wherever she was. "Thank you for knowing that we would need each other." David overheard her and smiled. "I think she's still watching over this place," he said, "making sure the right people find their way here when they need to." Hand in hand, they walked into their home, ready to face whatever the future might bring. knowing that they would face it together. The old house settled around them with its familiar creaking sounds as if it too was content with the love and life that now filled every room. Their story had begun with a mysterious appearance in the night, but it had become something much more beautiful, a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of helping others, and the amazing things that can happen when two lost souls find each other at exactly the right moment. The house continued its quiet work of healing, ready to welcome whoever might need shelter next, carrying on a tradition of kindness that had lasted for generations and would continue for generations to come.